It was said to be the ultimate guardian, a creature forged from the divine rulers of both land and sky. For 3,000 years, miners and merchants whispered its name in fear, telling stories of a beast that built its nest not from twigs and mud, but from solid gold, and lined it with the bones of those who dared to approach. They called it the Griffin, a biological impossibility, a mythological titan. But what if it wasn't a myth at all? What if the most incredible creature humanity ever conceived was real? And what if the evidence has been hiding in plain sight, buried in the desert for 75 million years? The story begins in the desolate, wind-swept steppes of Central Asia. Here, the ancient Scythians, nomadic warriors as fierce as the landscape they roamed, dug for gold. They were masters of their domain, but they lived in the shadow of a terrifying legend. A legend of a creature with the body of a lion, powerful, muscular, a predator of absolute authority on the ground. But fused to this powerful feline form was the head, talons, and wings of a giant eagle, the undisputed king of the air. It was a fusion of apex predators, a biological fortress of tooth, talon, and beak. It was said these creatures were fiercely territorial, impossibly strong, and drawn to the glittering veins of gold that ran through the mountains. They would hunt men and horses alike, tearing them apart with claws the size of daggers. For the Scythians, the Griffin wasn't just a story told around a fire. It was a mortal danger that lurked in the hills, a living embodiment of the peril that came with seeking riches. This image, this terrifying chimera, should have been a local folktale, a whisper that died in the Asian highlands. But it didn't. The story spread like wildfire. It traveled west along the Silk Road, carried in the caravans of traders who had heard the Scythian accounts firsthand. The ancient Greeks became obsessed. They documented the Griffin in meticulous detail, describing its cry as a blood-curdling shriek and its strength as great enough to carry off a live horse. The historian Herodotus wrote of them as the jealous guardians of northern gold. The playwright Aeschylus called them the sharp-beaked hounds of Zeus that do not bark. They weren't just monsters. They were divine agents, protectors of the sacred. The obsession didn't stop in Greece. The image of the lion-eagle hybrid appears, almost identically, in the art and lore of the Persian Empire, where they were seen as symbols of wisdom and enlightenment. It appears in ancient Egypt, guarding the pharaohs on their journey to the afterlife. It appears in the Roman Empire, carved into the sarcophagi of generals and the armor of legionaries, a symbol of ferocious, unyielding power. For thousands of years, across continents and cultures that had little to no direct contact, the same impossible creature kept appearing. The same body of a lion, the same head and wings of an eagle, the same role as a guardian of treasure and the divine. And this raises the single most important question of our story, a question that has puzzled historians and archaeologists for centuries. How is this possible? How did so many distinct, ancient civilizations, separated by vast distances and language barriers, all independently invent the exact same, highly specific creature? Was it simply a coincidence? A shared, primal fear of predators that manifested in a similar way? Or were these ancient people, the Scythians, the Greeks, the Persians, all describing something they had actually seen? To understand the Griffin, you must first understand its symbolic power. It represents a mastery of two worlds. The lion, the undisputed king of beasts, symbolizes courage, strength, and earthly royalty. It is pure terrestrial power. The eagle, the king of birds, represents divinity, intellect, and the heavens. It soars where no man can, a messenger of the gods. By combining them, ancient cultures created the ultimate symbol of power, a creature that was both king and god, a warrior and a sage. It was the perfect guardian because it commanded both the physical world and the divine one. It was a warning carved in stone and told in legend. Some treasures, whether they be gold or knowledge, are protected by forces beyond human comprehension. This is why kings and emperors adopted the Griffin as their own. To put a Griffin on your crest was to claim you possessed both the lion's courage and the eagle's divine right to rule. It was the ultimate power move. But the most compelling part of the Griffin legend isn't its symbolism. It's its connection to a very real, very specific place and a very real treasure: Scythian gold. The ancient Greek accounts are incredibly precise. They don't just say griffins live somewhere. They place them in a specific region, the foothills of the Altai Mountains in Central Asia. And for centuries, this was considered pure fantasy, until modern archaeology proved the Greeks were right. This exact region was, in fact, the site of one of the richest gold deposits in the ancient world, and it was heavily mined by the Scythians. The legends were geographically accurate. The treasure was real. So what about the monster? For decades, the answer was a shrug, a fascinating myth, but a myth nonetheless. Then, in the 1990s, a classical folklorist and historian named Adrienne Mayer proposed a theory so brilliant and so radical it changed everything. She asked a simple question. What else is found in the Gobi Desert and the Altai Mountains, right alongside the ancient gold mines? The answer: fossils. Millions of them. Specifically, the fossils of a dinosaur from the late Cretaceous period, about 75 million years ago. A dinosaur called the Protoceratops. Now picture this. You are an ancient Scythian miner, digging for gold in the wind-blasted desert. You unearth a skeleton unlike anything you've ever seen. It has a powerful four-legged body, about the size of a lion. It has a large sharp beak just like a bird of prey. It has large eye sockets. Most strikingly, it has a thin bony frill that extends from the back of its skull. To an ancient person, unfamiliar with the concept of dinosaurs, what would this look like? The frill's delicate bones could have easily been misinterpreted as the remnants of folded wings, or large pointed ears. The shoulder blades of the Protoceratops are unusually prominent, which could have further suggested the anchor points for powerful wings. The white, sun-bleached bones would have stood out starkly against the red desert sand, looking almost supernatural. You would have found a creature with the body of a lion, the beak of an eagle, and what looks like the basis for wings. You would have found it in the exact same place you were digging for gold. You would have, for all intents and purposes, discovered the remains of a griffin. Mayer's theory suggests that the griffin was not an invention. It was an interpretation. Ancient peoples were the world's first paleontologists. They found these strange fossils eroding out of the hillsides and tried to make sense of them. They reconstructed the creature based on the evidence they had, and the result was the griffin. This theory explains everything almost perfectly. It explains the creature's bizarre anatomy. It explains why the legend is so strongly tied to a specific geographical location, known for both gold and fossils. It explains why the stories describe the griffins as living in nests on the ground, because that's where the skeletons were found, often in clusters suggesting nesting sites. It is a stunningly elegant solution to a thousands-year-old mystery. The griffin wasn't a monster from our imagination, but a dinosaur from our planet's distant past. It's a perfect explanation. Almost, because there is one crucial detail that the Protoceratops theory cannot account for. One feature of the griffin, described consistently across nearly every culture, from the earliest Scythian tales to the detailed Greek records, that is nowhere to be found on the fossil. A detail so specific and so universal in the myth that its absence in the bones threatens to unravel the entire theory, and points towards an origin for the griffin that might be far stranger and far more profound than a simple case of mistaken identity. So where did the wings come from? This isn't a trivial detail. This is the griffin's essence. The majestic, feathered pinions are the feature that elevates it from a strange beast to a divine being. No ancient account, no carving, no piece of pottery leaves them out. They are as fundamental to the griffin as the lion's body or the eagle's head. If the Scythians were simply describing a four-legged, beaked fossil, where did they get the idea of massive, powerful wings? There are no wing imprints in the Gobi Desert sands. No feathered fossils alongside the Protoceratops. The wings seem to have been conjured from thin air. And that right there is the key. The wings weren't discovered. They were imagined. They were added. This suggests an entirely different origin story for the griffin. What if the griffin wasn't a creature that was found, but a creature that was forged? Not in the fires of a volcano or the crucible of evolution, but in the most powerful furnace of all, the human mind. What if the griffin is not a biological reality, but a symbolic one? A deliberate masterpiece of mythological engineering, designed to convey a concept so powerful, so absolute, that no existing animal could possibly represent it. To understand this, we have to stop thinking like paleontologists and start thinking like ancient priests, poets, and kings. We have to deconstruct the griffin, not into bone and sinew, but into pure idea. Let's take its two component parts, the lion and the eagle. In the ancient world, these were not just animals. They were living, breathing symbols, apex predators of both the physical and the metaphysical worlds. First, the lion. For thousands of years across Mesopotamia, Egypt, Persia, and Greece, the lion was the undisputed symbol of earthly power. It represented royalty, strength, courage, and the sun itself. Think of the sheer, raw presence of a lion. The ground-shaking roar, the muscular grace, the untamed solar fury captured in its golden mane. Kings and pharaohs didn't just hunt lions to prove their bravery. They sought to absorb the lion's essence. They depicted themselves as lions. The Great Sphinx of Giza, with its lion's body and pharaoh's head, is the ultimate statement of this. The king is not like a lion. The king is the lion, the embodiment of terrestrial authority and power. The Assyrian kings carved reliefs of themselves wrestling lions, a display of man conquering the very embodiment of nature's might. The lion was the king of beasts, the ruler of the land, the gold standard of mortal power. It was the ultimate CEO of the animal kingdom. Now let's look to the skies. To the eagle. If the lion was the king of the earth, the eagle was the undisputed sovereign of the heavens. It soars higher than any other bird, a tiny speck in the blue expanse, seeing the world with a clarity and perspective that is simply unavailable to ground dwellers. Its vision is legendary, its speed breathtaking, its power absolute within its domain. For ancient cultures, the eagle was the natural messenger of the gods, the one creature that could bridge the gap between the mortal world and the divine realm. It was the companion of Zeus, the king of the Greek gods, who would often take the form of an eagle himself. In ancient Rome, the eagle or aquila was the standard of the legions, a symbol of the empire's divine mandate and its far-reaching power. In Egypt, the falcon, a close cousin, was the symbol of the sky god Horus, the divine protector of the pharaohs. The eagle wasn't just a bird. It was a living conduit to the divine. It represented omniscience, spiritual authority, and the power of the heavens. So now let's perform the same act of creation that our ancestors did. In one hand you hold the lion, the ultimate symbol of earthly kingship, of physical strength, of courage, of the sun's golden power. In the other you hold the eagle, the ultimate symbol of celestial divinity, of spiritual vision, of heavenly authority, of the sky god's dominion. What happens when you fuse them together? You don't just get a strange hybrid. You create a symbol of absolute total power. You create a being that is both king of the earth and master of the heavens. The Griffin is the unification of the two greatest powers the ancient mind could conceive, the temporal and the spiritual, the terrestrial and the celestial. It is the perfect fusion of might and divinity. Its lion body gives it dominion over the material world, the land, the mountains, the deserts. Its eagle head and wings give it dominion over the spiritual world, the sky, the heavens, the realm of the gods. This is why griffins are almost universally depicted as guardians. They are not just random monsters. They are the ultimate protectors, because who could possibly challenge a creature that embodies both earthly and divine authority? They guard tombs of kings, because only a being of such magnitude is fit to protect the passage of a ruler into the afterlife. They guard treasures and mines of gold, like those the Scythians spoke of, because gold itself was a symbol of the sun, of royalty, of incorruptibility. The griffin guards gold not because it's greedy, but because it is the physical manifestation of the sun's power on earth, and the griffin is its natural, divinely appointed protector. It is the ultimate security system, a supernatural Fort Knox. This symbolic origin also explains the griffin's dual nature in mythology. It is often seen as a force of divine justice, a noble and majestic creature that serves the gods. But it is also portrayed as a fearsome, aggressive beast that will tear apart anyone who dares to trespass. This isn't a contradiction. It's a reflection of its composite nature. It has the noble, far-seeing wisdom of the eagle, but also the ferocious, violent power of the lion. It is a symbol of righteous power, and that power can be both a protective shield and a terrifying weapon. It is divine retribution given claws and a beak. So the griffin wasn't a misidentified dinosaur. It was a conscious, brilliant act of symbolic creation, a mythological power move. Ancient cultures needed a symbol for a concept that had no earthly equivalent. The concept of power so complete it was both royal and divine. They didn't find the griffin, they invented it because they had to. It was the answer to a question: what does absolute authority look like? It looks like a lion with the wings of an eagle. This theory elegantly solves the mystery of the wings and explains the griffin's consistent role across cultures. It wasn't an animal that spawned a legend. It was a legend that took the form of an animal. But this raises an even deeper, more fascinating question. If the Griffin was an invention, a piece of symbolic technology, then who were the inventors? Where did this incredibly powerful idea first take root and blossom into the creature we know today? The fossil theory points us to the Scythians in Central Asia, around the 7th century BCE. But the symbolic griffin, its tracks go back much, much further, into the very dawn of civilization, to a place of sun-baked brick and the world's first empires. The earliest griffins ever discovered are not the classic lion-eagle hybrids we imagine. They are older, stranger, and they pull us even deeper into the heart of the mystery, to a time when gods and monsters first walked the earth. These were not creatures of noble bearing, guarding chests of gold. The griffins unearthed from the dust of Mesopotamia were something else entirely, something primordial. To find them, we must travel back 5,000 years, to the sun-scorched plains of what is now modern-day Iran, to a city called Susa, the heart of a kingdom known as Elam. Here, in the cradle of civilization, archaeologists found something incredible. Not giant statues or towering reliefs, but something much smaller, much more personal. Tiny, intricate cylinders carved from stone, no bigger than your thumb. These were cylinder seals, the ancient world's equivalent of a signature, a credit card, and a work of art all rolled into one. They would roll these seals over wet clay to mark property, to sign contracts, to seal jars of grain and wine. And etched into their surfaces, in breathtaking miniature detail, were scenes of gods, kings, and monsters. And among them, the earliest griffins known to man. But when you look closely, the image is jarring, unfamiliar. This isn't the creature we know. Many of these proto-griffins have the hindquarters of a lion and the head and wings of an eagle, but that's where the similarities end. Some have long serpentine necks. Others have the ears of a goat or the horns of a bull. Some are shown with scorpion tails, dripping with venom. They are demonic, chaotic, a raw fusion of nature's most terrifying attributes. They are often depicted not as noble guardians, but as vicious aggressors, locked in combat with heroes or attacking wild animals. This was the griffin in its infancy, a being of raw, untamed power. It wasn't a symbol of enlightened wisdom. It was a symbol of brutal physical dominance. And to understand why, you have to understand the world it was born into. This was a time of constant, low-level warfare, where city-states fought over water, land, and the favor of violent, unpredictable gods. The world was a chaotic place, full of real-life predators, lions, wolves, venomous snakes. The people of Mesopotamia looked at the world and saw a struggle for survival. So, how do you create a symbol of ultimate power in a world like that? You don't just pick one predator. You take the most dominant creature of the sky, the eagle with its piercing vision and deadly talons, and you fuse it with the undisputed king of the land, the lion, a walking engine of muscle and fang. You create a super predator, a creature that owns both heaven and earth, a being that represents dominion over the entire known cosmos. This wasn't just an artist's fantasy, it was a theological and political statement. By creating the griffin, these early civilizations were trying to conceptualize a power greater than anything found in nature. A power that could belong only to the gods, or to the kings who claimed to speak for them. The griffin was the divine attack dog, the enforcer of a god's will. When you saw a griffin on a cylinder seal, it was a message. The owner of this seal is protected by a power that transcends the natural order. And then, something happened that would catapult the griffin from a regional monster to an international superstar of the ancient world. An empire was born. Not just a kingdom, but a true empire, the world's first. The Akkadian Empire. Around 2300 BC, a man named Sargon of Akkad conquered the disparate city-states of Mesopotamia and forged them into a single unified state. It was an act of unprecedented ambition, and Sargon needed symbols to match. He needed propaganda. The Akkadians adopted and standardized the griffin. They refined its form, stripping away some of the more chaotic elements like the snake tails and goat horns, and honing in on the core concept, the perfect fusion of lion and eagle. Under the Akkadians, the griffin became an imperial symbol. It was the emblem of the state's power to conquer and control. It was often shown tethered or subdued by gods or heroes, a representation of the untamable forces of nature being brought to heel by divine and royal authority. The message was clear. Just as the gods can control the mighty griffin, so too can the Akkadian king control the chaos of the world and bring order to his subjects. We see them on seals flanking the thrones of deities, no longer just wild beasts, but now incorporated into the divine hierarchy. They were promoted from mere monsters to celestial bodyguards. One of the most powerful roles they played was as the vehicle of the gods. We see griffins pulling the chariots of storm gods and goddesses of war. Imagine the psychological impact of that image. A chariot is a human invention, a tool of war. But the gods don't need horses. They harness the very essence of predatory power. They ride into battle on a storm of claws and feathers. This imagery elevated the griffin from a terrifying monster to an instrument of divine judgment, a living weapon of the gods. This is a critical shift in the creature's identity. It's no longer just a monster you hope to survive an encounter with. It is now an agent of a higher power. It has a purpose, a job, and that job is often violent. On Akkadian art, we see griffins tearing apart the enemies of the gods, their beaks and claws sinking into the flesh of those who would defy the divine order. For the average person, the griffin was an avatar of awe and terror, a reminder of the cosmic forces that governed their lives, and the brutal power of the empire that governed their land. But why this specific combination? Why not a wolf hawk or a bear vulture? The lion and the eagle held specific, potent symbolism that went far beyond just being apex predators. The lion, with its golden coat, was deeply associated with the sun. It represented fiery terrestrial power, royalty, and courage. The eagle, soaring in the heavens, was a creature of the sky, a messenger of the gods, associated with the storm, with intellect, and with a perspective that sees everything. Fusing them together was an act of profound symbolic alchemy. You are combining the sun and the sky, fire and air, earthly royalty and divine authority. The griffin is not just a monster. It is a living hieroglyph representing total cosmic power. It is the unification of opposites, the resolution of conflict in one perfect, terrifying form. It is the power of the king on earth, backed by the authority of the gods in heaven. No other combination of animals could so perfectly capture the ambition of the world's first empires. This audacious belief that mortals could, for the first time, impose a lasting centralized order on a chaotic world. The ideas forged in the kills of Mesopotamia were too powerful to remain contained. As the Akkadian Empire expanded, and as trade routes snaked across the deserts and seas of the ancient world, the image of the griffin traveled with them. Merchants carried seals bearing its image. Soldiers marched under banners that may have depicted it. And other cultures, powerful and ancient in their own right, saw this creature and were captivated. It moved west into Syria and the Levant. It traveled south towards the Persian Gulf. And crucially, it began to filter into the single most powerful and enduring civilization of the ancient world, Egypt. But the land of the pharaohs was not empty of monsters. It had its own pantheon of powerful composite creatures, its own ideas about the afterlife, divinity, and the nature of power. And as the Mesopotamian griffin entered this new, vibrant world, it would come face to face with a rival, a magnificent, enigmatic beast of its own, a hybrid of lion and man. The griffin was about to meet the Sphinx, and in the shadow of the Great Pyramids, its story would be changed forever. The desert air is different. It's heavy with the weight of dynasties, thick with the scent of sun-baked stone and the eternal life-giving Nile. Here, power isn't just claimed. It's built into the very landscape, carved into monuments so vast they seem to hold the sky aloft. And at the heart of this kingdom of god-kings and eternal life, the griffin, a creature born of Mesopotamian mountains and nomadic steppes, found itself an alien in an ancient land. Its sharp eagle eyes, accustomed to scanning rocky crags for treasure, now looked upon a horizon dominated not by peaks, but by the smooth geometric perfection of the pyramids. And there, crouched in the sand as if it had grown from the bedrock of the earth itself, was the guardian of this place, the Sphinx, a being of quiet, immense, and terrifying stillness. It shared the griffin's leonine form, the same embodiment of raw terrestrial power, the same muscular haunches and formidable claws. But where the griffin soared into the celestial, the Sphinx delved into the cerebral. It wore the face of a human, a pharaoh calm and all-knowing. It didn't screech a challenge from the sky. It waited, its limestone gaze fixed on eternity, posing a silent riddle to all who approached. This was not a rival of muscle and talon, but of concept and meaning. The griffin was a creature of action, a fierce protector whose value was in its ferocity, its swift judgment. It was the divine watchdog, the celestial enforcer. The Sphinx, however, was a guardian of knowledge. It protected the sacred tombs not with a show of force, but with a challenge of the intellect. To pass the Sphinx, you didn't need to be strong. You needed to be wise. It represented the union of animal strength and human intellect, the pharaoh's power combined with his divine wisdom. It was a creature of the earth, a gatekeeper between the world of the living and the eternal, silent world of the dead. How could the Griffin, this dynamic, aggressive hybrid of sky and earth, find its place in a world guarded by such a creature of stone and secrets? It couldn't simply replace the Sphinx. The Sphinx was too deeply woven into the Egyptian soul, a symbol as fundamental as the rising and setting of the sun. A direct confrontation, a mythological turf war, was never on the table. Instead, something far more interesting happened. The Griffin wasn't rejected, it was adopted. It was assimilated. The brilliant minds of the new kingdom saw the Griffin not as a threat, but as an asset. They looked at this foreign beast and recognized a different kind of power, one that complemented their own. The Sphinx was static, a symbol of eternal, unchanging authority. The Griffin was kinetic, a symbol of active, conquering might. And a pharaoh needed both. He needed the wisdom and permanence of the Sphinx, but he also needed the swift, punishing force of the Griffin. So the Griffin was given a new job. It was brought into the service of the divine rulers. On the walls of tombs and temples, you begin to see them. Griffins no longer guarding treasure, but now depicted as beasts of war and divine procession. They are shown pulling the chariots of pharaohs, their powerful wings beating the air as they carry their master into battle. They become an emblem of the king's unstoppable military prowess. In this context, the Griffin wasn't just a monster. It was a living weapon, a symbol of righteous, divinely sanctioned victory. The eagle head, once just a sign of its celestial nature, now became directly associated with the sun god, Ra, and his earthly incarnation, the pharaoh. The Griffin was, in essence, pulling the chariot of the sun itself. This transformation was profound. In Mesopotamia, the Griffin was a guardian of the sacred. In Egypt, it became an instrument of the sacred. It was a subtle but crucial shift. The lion body still represented earthly dominion, but the eagle head now symbolized a connection to the supreme solar deity, a stamp of divine approval on the pharaoh's conquests. The Egyptians even gave it a name, Tesh, and it was often depicted trampling the enemies of Egypt under its claws, a ferocious protector of the established order. Think about the two guardians. The Sphinx sits at the threshold of the afterlife, asking its famous riddle. What goes on 4 feet in the morning, 2 feet at noon, and 3 feet in the evening? The answer, of course, is man. It's a riddle about the mortal journey, about the nature of humanity itself. It's a philosophical test. The Griffin, in its new Egyptian role, posed a different kind of question, not with words but with its very being. As it pulled the pharaoh's chariot, its presence asked, "Do you stand with the divine order or against it?" There was no riddle to solve, only a choice to be made. To stand against the Griffin was to stand against the pharaoh, and to stand against the pharaoh was to stand against the gods themselves. One was a test of the mind, the other a test of allegiance. This Egyptian chapter added a new layer of meaning to the Griffin, one of royal authority and military might. It was no longer just a wild, mythical beast from a far-off land. It was now a polished, potent symbol, integrated into one of the most powerful and sophisticated civilizations the world had ever known. And like everything Egypt touched, this new version of the Griffin was destined for export. As Egyptian influence, trade, and culture spread across the Mediterranean, so too did its symbols. The image of the Griffin, now charged with the power of the pharaohs and the sun god, traveled on merchant ships and in the minds of artisans. It sailed from the mouth of the Nile and journeyed north, across the deep blue of the sea. But its destination was a land of jagged coastlines, rocky islands, and a people with a very different view of the world. A people who didn't just adopt monsters, they challenged them. They were a people of heroes and philosophers, of logic and epic poetry. The Griffin, fresh from its service to the god-kings of Egypt, was about to make landfall in ancient Greece. And in the land of Zeus, Apollo, and Heracles, its story would be shattered and reforged. It would cease to be a symbol of divine order, and would instead become a creature of chaos, a monstrous obstacle for a new breed of hero to overcome. The Griffin was about to meet its greatest adversaries yet, and in doing so, achieve its most enduring fame. The stage was now set in the sun-drenched lands of ancient Greece, a world of marble temples, ambitious city-states, and a new kind of protagonist, the the mortal hero. In this world, old gods were questioned, ancient traditions were challenged, and the line between the divine and the monstrous began to blur. For the Griffin, this was a radical transformation. No longer was it simply the silent, stoic guardian of a pharaoh's tomb or a king's throne. It was cast in a new, more dramatic role: the fierce, untamable guardian of the world's greatest treasures. And where there is treasure, there is always greed. Our story takes us to the very edge of the known world, to the windswept, unforgiving steppes of Scythia. It was a land of myth and rumor, a place where Greek traders and explorers heard tales that would chill them to the bone. The great historian Herodotus, the father of history, was the first to write these tales down for a wider audience. He spoke of a tribe of men, strange and fierce, known as the Arimaspians. These were not ordinary men. They were said to have only a single eye in the center of their foreheads. And these one-eyed men were locked in an eternal bloody conflict. Their enemy? The gold-guarding Griffins. According to the legends Herodotus recorded, somewhere in the cold, desolate north, past the lands of the Scythians, lay vast, untapped veins of gold. This wasn't just gold dust panned from a river. This was a raw, primal source of wealth, glittering in the rock under the bleak northern sun. And this treasure was not unguarded. It was the Griffin's domain. Here, the creatures were not symbols of royalty but elemental forces of nature. They built their nests directly on the gold deposits, weaving shimmering strands of the precious metal into the twigs and branches, their eggs literally resting on a bed of unimaginable wealth. The Arimaspians, driven by an insatiable lust for this gold, would mount daring raids into Griffin territory. Imagine the scene: a band of one-eyed warriors on horseback, charging across the barren plains towards mountains said to be crawling with these lion-eagle hybrids. They were treasure hunters, attempting the most dangerous heist in the ancient world. The Griffins, in turn, were portrayed as creatures of ferocious territoriality and righteous fury. They were not evil, but they were the sworn protectors of the earth's riches. They would descend from the sky with terrifying shrieks, their eagle claws ready to shred armor and flesh, their lion bodies pouncing with bone-crushing force. This was a war of attrition. For every Arimaspian who managed to snatch a few nuggets of gold and escape, countless others were torn apart, their greed meeting a swift and brutal end. The story became a powerful cautionary tale throughout the Greek world. It was a myth about hubris, about the dangers of venturing into the unknown and attempting to steal what the gods, or nature itself, had deemed sacred. The Griffin was the ultimate symbol of this divine retribution. It represented the violent, deadly consequences of unchecked avarice. It taught a simple, terrifying lesson: some treasures are meant to be left alone. But this was ancient Greece, a culture of immense complexity and contradiction. And just as the Griffin was being cast as a monstrous hoarder of gold in one story, it was being revered as a sacred companion to a god in another. In the very heart of Greek religion, within the cult of one of the most powerful Olympians, the Griffin retained its ancient, noble status. That god was Apollo, the god of light, prophecy, music, and knowledge. Apollo's connection to the Griffin was profound. He was often depicted riding one, or in a chariot pulled by a team of the majestic beasts. This wasn't a master and servant relationship. It was a partnership of divine equals. The Griffin was his sacred animal, a creature that embodied his own attributes: the penetrating vision of the eagle, the noble strength of the lion, a connection to both the heavens and the earth. These Griffins were not savage monsters guarding gold. They were divine agents, soaring through the skies on errands for the god of light. Their most important duty was to guard the path to a mythical paradise known as Hyperborea. According to legend, this was a land far to the north, beyond the freezing winds, where the sun always shone. It was a place of eternal spring, a utopia where its people lived for 1,000 years in perfect happiness, free from disease, old age, and war. It was Apollo's favorite earthly home, the place he would retreat to during the winter months. And the only way to get there was to pass his guardians, the Griffins. Here, the Griffin's role is completely inverted from the Arimaspian tale. It is not a monster to be fought and overcome. It is a gatekeeper. If your heart was pure, if your intentions were noble, the Griffin might let you pass into the land of eternal sunlight. But if you were driven by greed or conquest, like the Arimaspians, you would find no paradise. You would only find a swift and violent death. The Griffin became a complex moral symbol. It was a mirror, reflecting the intentions of those who approached it. To the greedy it was a monster. To the pure it was a guide. This duality, the monstrous and the divine, made the Griffin one of the most compelling creatures in the Greek imagination. But its story was about to take one more truly incredible turn. The Griffin had been a symbol for kings and a companion for gods. Now it would become a vehicle for the greatest conqueror the world had ever known, Alexander the Great. Centuries after Herodotus, in the period following Alexander's death, a collection of fantastic legends began to circulate about his life, known as the Alexander Romance. These were tales that blended historical fact with wild, mythological fiction, elevating the Macedonian king to the status of a demigod. And the most breathtaking of these stories involved his quest to not just conquer the earth, but the heavens themselves. To do this, he would need to fly. And to fly, he would need the power of the Griffin. The legend states that Alexander, ever the ambitious innovator, devised a remarkable flying machine. He constructed a large, throne-like chariot or basket. He then managed to capture two massive, powerful griffins. He starved them for 3 days, making them ravenously hungry. Then, he yoked them to his chariot. On 2 long spears held aloft above the griffins' heads, he baited them with large chunks of meat, just out of their reach. The plan was as simple as it was ingenious. The starving griffins, seeing the meat, would surge upwards trying to reach it. As they flew higher and higher, the bait would always remain just ahead, compelling them to continue their ascent. Alexander the Great, seated on his throne, was carried into the sky, powered by the raw divine strength of these creatures. The story describes his incredible journey. He flew so high that the world below him shrank to the size of a small ball, and the sea looked like a coiled serpent wrapped around it. He was met by a divine, bird-like creature who warned him to go no further, that he had seen all a mortal was meant to see. Heeding the warning, Alexander lowered the spears, and the griffins, no longer striving for the bait above, descended back to earth, landing safely hundreds of miles from where they had started. This legend is a masterpiece of symbolism. It represents the absolute peak of human ambition. Alexander, a mortal man, harnesses the power of a divine creature, a creature associated with gods and kings, to achieve the impossible, to literally ascend to the heavens. The Griffin is no longer just a guardian or a monster. It is a force of nature, a living engine of celestial travel. The story solidifies the Griffin's status as a creature of immense power, a being so magnificent that even the conqueror of the known world would look to it to achieve his ultimate dream. From a treasure-hoarding terror on the steppes of Scythia, to the sacred companion of the god Apollo, to the living engine of Alexander's celestial chariot, the Griffin had journeyed through the very heart of the Greek imagination. It was a monster, a guardian, a symbol, and a tool. Each story added another layer to its identity, making it richer, more complex, and more powerful. The Greeks had taken an ancient symbol of order and infused it with their own passions, their fears of greed, their reverence for the gods, and their boundless ambition. And now, as the power of Greece began to wane, a new empire was rising, one that would take the Griffin and forge it into an emblem of its own military might and imperial glory. The Romans were coming. And as the Romans came, they did not simply conquer, they absorbed. They were the ultimate cultural collectors, taking the art, philosophy, and gods of the vanquished and reforging them in the fires of their own ambition. The Greeks had dreamed of the Griffin, the Romans would put it to work. For the Roman mind, a creature of such immense power could not simply be a distant guardian of a mythical treasure. It had to serve a purpose. It had to serve Rome. The Griffin's transformation began, from a creature of divine mystery to an emblem of earthly military dominion. To understand this shift, you have to understand the Roman psyche. They were engineers, soldiers, and administrators. Their gods were patrons of the state. Their art was a celebration of victory, and their myths were tools to legitimize their power. When a Roman legionary looked at a griffin, he didn't see a creature of Apollo, the god of poetry and light. He saw the perfect soldier. He saw the undisputed king of the earth, the lion, merged with the absolute sovereign of the sky, the eagle. And the eagle, the Aquila, was a symbol the Romans understood in their very bones. It was the sacred standard of their legions, the personal emblem of Jupiter, king of the gods. To lose the legion's eagle in battle was the ultimate disgrace, a fate worse than death. So when they encountered the Griffin, they saw a creature that was not just part eagle, but an enhanced eagle. It was an eagle given the terrestrial strength, the the ferocity, and the unyielding courage of a lion. It was a symbol of total victory, of dominance on every conceivable battlefield, both on the ground and in the air. The Griffin became the ultimate war machine, a living embodiment of the Roman legion's ideal. The discipline and vision of the eagle, combined with the raw, brutal power of the lion. This new, weaponized griffin began appearing everywhere in the Roman world, stamped onto the very machinery of war and empire. We find them etched into the ornate helmets of legionaries, a terrifying visage meant to strike fear into the hearts of their enemies. They were carved into the scabbards of gladius swords and embossed on the face of shields. To carry the image of the griffin was to carry an invocation of unstoppable force. It was a promise of victory, a declaration that the soldier who bore it possessed the heart of a lion and the eyes of an eagle. But the griffin's role wasn't limited to the battlefield. In Roman domestic life, it became a powerful guardian, a symbol of protection and security. They adorned the walls of villas in stunning mosaics and frescoes, standing sentinel over the Roman family. They were carved into the legs of ornate furniture and the handles of ceremonial vessels. Here, the griffin was a statement of the owner's power and status. To have a griffin in your home was to align yourself with the strength and majesty of the empire itself. It was a way of saying, this household is protected by the same ferocity that guards Rome. Perhaps the most poignant use of the griffin was in Roman funerary art. Massive, intricately carved sarcophagi often featured pairs of griffins. But these were not the gentle psychopomps of the Greeks, guiding souls to the afterlife. The Roman griffin was a formidable protector of the deceased's remains, a guardian ensuring that the tomb would remain undisturbed for eternity. It was a final, defiant display of power. Even in death, the Roman citizen was under the protection of this mighty beast, a symbol that their legacy, like the empire, was meant to endure forever. And the Roman fascination with the griffin deepened as they adopted and adapted the Greek goddess Nemesis. The Greeks saw Nemesis as the spirit of divine retribution, the inescapable agent of justice against human hubris. The Romans, however, saw her as something more personal, more political. She became Nemesis Augusta, the divine vengeance of the emperor and the state. Her justice was swift, imperial, and absolute, and her chosen companion, her enforcer, was the griffin. In this role, the griffin became the symbol of fate, particularly in the one place where a Roman's fate was most brutally on display, the gladiatorial arena. Amphitheaters often had a small shrine dedicated to Nemesis, where gladiators would pray before battle. For them, the griffin was the embodiment of the arena's cruel logic. It represented the inescapable, impartial judgment of combat, victory or death. There was no in-between. The griffin, with its eagle's sharp judgment and lion's lethal execution, was the perfect symbol for the finality of the gladiator's life. It was a constant reminder that the emperor's justice and the judgment of the crowd was absolute. This was the griffin's new reality. It had been pulled from the pages of myth and thrust into the heart of the world's greatest empire. The Greeks had placed it at the edge of the known world, guarding a treasure that could never be reached. The Romans brought it to the center of civilization and made it the guardian of a treasure they had already won: the Roman Empire itself. It was no longer a creature of whispers and legends told around a fire. It was a symbol of tangible, brutal, and glorious power, carved in stone, cast in bronze, and marching across continents on the standards of the legions. For centuries, as Rome flourished, so did the griffin. It was the emblem of an empire at its zenith, a creature that perfectly captured the Roman synthesis of wild ferocity and disciplined order. It represented a world held in a delicate, violent balance by the power of the Caesars. The shadow of its eagle wings fell across every province, and the echo of its lion's roar was heard in every decree from the Senate. The griffin was Rome, and Rome was the world. But no empire lasts forever. And as the foundations of Rome began to crack, as barbarian incursions chipped away at its borders and internal strife rotted it from within, a new force was rising. It was not an army of warriors with swords and shields, but an army of believers with faith in Scripture. A new religion, born in a distant province of Judea, was spreading like wildfire through the empire. This was Christianity, and its worldview had no place for the pagan symbols of the old gods. These majestic creatures, once seen as divine guardians and emblems of imperial power, were about to be recast in a terrifying new light. The griffin was no longer a symbol of divine order, but a perversion of God's creation. Its dual nature was not a sign of mastery, but of monstrosity. The age of the imperial Griffin was ending, and in the coming darkness of a collapsing world, it was about to face its most powerful enemy yet, the devil. With the fall of Rome, the world didn't just lose an empire. It lost its center of gravity. The old certainties, the old gods, the old power structures all crumbled into dust. And into this vacuum of belief, this gaping wound in the Western psyche, a new power rose, one built not on legions and gold, but on faith and fear. As Christianity spread across the desolate landscapes of the former empire, it embarked on a campaign of spiritual conquest. It couldn't just build new churches, it had to tear down the old temples, both the ones made of stone and the ones that existed in the minds of the people. Every pagan god, every local spirit, every ancient symbol had to be reevaluated, recategorized, and if it couldn't be absorbed, it had to be destroyed. And the Griffin, the glorious sun-drenched symbol of empire and divinity, was a prime target. It was too powerful, too deeply ingrained in the pagan consciousness to be ignored. It represented everything the new faith stood against: earthly majesty, violent power, and the pride of kings. So, the early church fathers and theologians began a systematic character assassination. They looked at this majestic creature and saw not a union of heaven and earth, but a perversion, a monstrous hybrid. You see, in the rigid theological framework of the early Middle Ages, God had created the world according to a divine, unchangeable plan. He made the birds of the air and the beasts of the field, each according to its kind. The Griffin, a chaotic mashup of lion and eagle, was therefore not a divine creation, but a demonic mockery of it. It was an act of cosmic rebellion, a living blasphemy that defied God's sacred order. Its once noble traits were twisted into a laundry list of mortal sins. The eagle's sharp-eyed command of the sky was no longer divine oversight. It was pride, the deadly, arrogant pride that led Lucifer himself to be cast out of heaven. The Griffin, soaring above the world, became a symbol of the hubris of earthly rulers who believed they were gods, a reminder of the doomed Tower of Babel, of humanity reaching too high and being struck down. Its lion half, once a symbol of courage and royalty, was now reinterpreted as unrestrained wrath. Its ferocity was not the noble violence of a king defending his territory, but the savage, mindless fury of a demon tearing at the souls of the damned. It became a beast of pure, destructive impulse, a manifestation of the anger that festered in the hearts of sinful men. And its most famous role, the guardian of gold, underwent the most damning transformation of all. The Griffin was no longer a noble protector of divine treasure. It was a hoarder, a miser. It became the ultimate symbol of avarice, of greed. In a world where poverty was seen as a path to piety and charity was a sacred duty, the image of a creature sitting on a mountain of useless, glittering gold was profoundly evil. This wasn't protection, it was a spiritual sickness. The Griffin's gold was the wealth of the world, stolen from humanity and kept from the service of God. Every coin it guarded was a loaf of bread that could not feed the hungry, a stone that could not build a church. The Griffin's lair became a glittering golden hell, a testament to the soul-destroying emptiness of material wealth. This new demonic identity began to spread through the dark forests and muddy villages of medieval Europe. The Griffin was no longer a creature you carved onto a palace gate. It was a monster you whispered about around the fire. It became a bogeyman, a tool for moral instruction. Stories were told of griffins carrying off not just horses, but men, punishing them for their sins. It was said that the Griffin had a particular hatred for the horse, a creature that in medieval symbolism was often associated with lust and uncontrolled passion. And so the Griffin became a divine punisher, a winged demon sent to tear apart the lustful and the passionate, a terrifying physical manifestation of God's judgment. The artists and storytellers of the age cemented this diabolical image. In the margins of illuminated manuscripts, where monks painstakingly copied the word of God, they would draw grotesque griffins, their features twisted into demonic snarls. In the burgeoning bestiaries, the encyclopedias of mythical creatures, the Griffin was often listed among the servants of Satan. While some great thinkers like the poet Dante would later attempt to reclaim the creature, using a griffin to pull the chariot of the church in his Divine Comedy as a complex symbol of Christ's dual nature, this was an intellectual theological argument. For the common person, the Griffin of the popular imagination was not a divine chariot puller. It was a monster lurking in the shadows. This spiritual war against the Griffin was fought not just in texts, but in stories of flesh and blood faith. Legends arose of saints and holy men confronting these demonic beasts, not with swords and shields, but with the power of God. Imagine a pious hermit, living a life of quiet prayer in the desolate mountains where a griffin was said to guard its treasure. The local villagers are terrified, their livestock and even their children disappearing. They beg the holy man for help. He doesn't gather an army. He takes only his cross and his faith. He walks into the Griffin's valley, the air thick with the stench of blood and the intimidating aura of ancient power. The Griffin descends from the sky, a terrifying whirlwind of claws and feathers, its screech echoing like a judgment. It expects fear. It expects a fight. But the hermit simply stands his ground, holding up his cross. He doesn't speak of violence. He speaks of the emptiness of the Griffin's gold, the vanity of its pride. He offers not a challenge but a choice. Release the worldly treasure and the souls it has captured, or be consumed by the very greed that defines it. In these stories, the Griffin, a creature of pure physical might, is always defeated by the spiritual strength of the humble saint. Faith triumphs over fury. Humility breaks the back of pride. The power of God is shown to be infinitely greater than the demonic power of the old world. Through hundreds of years of these stories, these sermons, these fearsome illustrations, the transformation was complete. The majestic creature of the sun, the symbol of Persian kings and Roman emperors, the guardian of divine light, had been dragged down into the muck and the darkness. It was now a demon, a fiend, a cautionary tale. It represented a catalogue of sins, pride, wrath, greed, and served as a terrifying reminder of the consequences of defying God's order. The Griffin was now a creature of the pit, a symbol of everything humanity feared in itself. It was cast out, demonized, and its noble legacy was all but erased from the memory of the world. But in the strange alchemy of myth, where symbols are forever dying and being reborn, even the most fallen creature can find a new purpose. For as the age of faith reached its zenith, the Griffin was about to undergo its most shocking transformation yet, and be resurrected as the most unlikely symbol of all, Jesus Christ himself. Sounds impossible, even heretical. A creature born from pagan myth, a monster that guarded worldly treasure and tore men to pieces, now a symbol for the central figure of Christianity? How could a beast that theologians had literally labeled an agent of the devil be reborn as the Son of God? The answer lies in one of the most brilliant acts of symbolic appropriation in human history. The medieval church didn't erase the Griffin. It baptized it. It looked at this impossible creature and saw, not a monster, but a miracle of divine allegory. The key was the Griffin's dual nature. This was the secret that unlocked its Christian potential. Think about it. The Griffin is a perfect union of two kings. The lion, the undisputed king of the earth, and the eagle, the unchallenged king of the sky. One terrestrial, one celestial. One bound to the world, the other soaring towards the heavens. For medieval theologians, this was not a contradiction. It was a perfect, living metaphor for Jesus Christ himself. Christ, according to doctrine, was both fully human and fully divine. He was the Son of Man who walked the earth, who bled and died. That was the lion. But he was also the Son of God, who ascended into heaven, who was one with the Father. That was the eagle. The Griffin wasn't just a monster. It was the living embodiment of the hypostatic union, the theological concept of Christ's two natures in one divine person. It was a creature that could explain the unexplainable. Suddenly, all of the Griffin's attributes were seen in a new holy light. Its incredible strength was no longer just animal ferocity. It was Christ's power over sin and death. Its sharp eyes, able to see for miles from the sky, became a symbol of divine omniscience, the all-seeing eye of God. The lion's roar was the voice of judgment, and the eagle's flight was the promise of resurrection and ascension into heaven. The Griffin became the ultimate paradox, a king of the earth who belonged to the sky, a perfect symbol for the King of Kings who came down from heaven to rule the hearts of men. This transformation was cemented in the pages of the medieval bestiaries. These weren't just books about animals, they were illustrated guides to God's creation, where every beast, real or imagined, held a moral or spiritual lesson. The entry for the Griffin in texts like the famous Aberdeen Bestiary explained this new symbolism explicitly. It told readers that just as the Griffin is the lord of all four-footed beasts and all birds of the air, so too is Christ the Lord of all humanity, both those who live a spiritual, aerial life and those who live a more worldly, terrestrial one. The Griffin, once a footnote in pagan lore, was now required reading for any devout Christian seeking to understand the nature of their Savior. And so, the very things that once made the Griffin demonic were reforged into divine virtues. Remember its hatred for horses? The early church fathers associated the horse with lust and earthly pride. So the Griffin's instinct to destroy horses was reinterpreted as Christ's righteous fury against sin and the devil. And what about its role as a guardian of treasure? This was the most profound transformation of all. The Griffin was no longer hoarding gold and emeralds. Instead, it was now seen as the guardian of the ultimate treasure, the human soul, and the divine wisdom found in the Holy Scriptures. It became a protector of the sacred, a fierce defender of the path to salvation. In this new context, the Griffin's violent nature wasn't a flaw, it was a feature. It represented the terrifying, unyielding power of God that would protect the faithful from the forces of darkness. This new, sanctified Griffin began to appear everywhere. It was no longer just a decoration on a pagan warrior's shield. It was now carved into the very architecture of faith. You could find it perched on the facades of cathedrals in Pisa and Verona, its stone eyes staring down, a silent sermon for the masses who could not read. It was etched into baptismal fonts, symbolizing the new life in Christ. It was woven into priestly vestments and illuminated in the margins of precious Bibles. For the average person in the Middle Ages, the Griffin was a constant, powerful reminder of Christ's dual nature and his supreme authority over both heaven and earth. But the Griffin's ascension to Christian stardom reached its absolute peak in the 14th century, in the pages of one of the most important works of literature ever written, Dante Alighieri's The Divine Comedy. In the second part, Purgatorio, as Dante reaches the summit of the mountain of Purgatory and enters the earthly paradise, he witnesses a divine procession. And what is pulling the glorious two-wheeled chariot of the church? Not angels, not horses, but a single magnificent griffin. Dante's description is breathtaking. The griffin's eagle parts are pure gold, representing Christ's divinity. Its lion parts are white mixed with blood red, symbolizing the flesh and blood of his humanity, a direct reference to the Eucharist. The griffin moves the chariot, the church itself, but its own form is never reflected in the mirrors of theology. It is a mystery beyond human comprehension, just like the nature of Christ. By placing the griffin at the very center of this divine pageant, Dante wasn't just using a clever symbol. He was making a definitive statement. He was elevating the griffin from a beast in a bestiary to an essential icon of the Christian faith, a creature worthy of pulling the chariot of God's chosen institution on earth. It was the ultimate validation. From a demon of greed to the very symbol of Christ the King. It was a journey more incredible than any myth. The griffin had been conquered, not by a sword, but by theology. It was captured, tamed, and remade in God's image. Its ferocity was now holy. Its hybrid nature was now a divine lesson. It had achieved a kind of symbolic immortality, carved into the stone and soul of medieval Europe. The creature had reached the pinnacle of its power and meaning, a revered emblem of the highest spiritual truth. But the world was changing. The age of faith, with its allegories and bestiaries, was beginning to give way to a new era, an age of reason, of science, of exploration. Men like Leonardo da Vinci were dissecting bodies, and explorers like Columbus were charting unknown seas, finding new lands filled with real, verifiable creatures. The shadows where monsters once lurked were being flooded with the light of empirical evidence. In this brave new world, a creature like the griffin faced an existential threat far greater than any Arimaspian warrior. The question was no longer what the griffin symbolized, but whether it had ever existed at all. The age of belief was ending, and the age of proof was about to begin. The world was shrinking. For centuries, the griffin had thrived in the vast, unknown spaces on the map, the intimidating mountain ranges of Scythia, the sun-scorched plains of India, the hazy frontiers of the known world. But as the Renaissance dawned, humanity began to hold a brighter candle to the shadows, and the age of exploration began to fill in the blanks. This new era, driven by an insatiable hunger for knowledge, commerce, and conquest, would inadvertently become the griffin's greatest trial. The question was no longer simply about belief but about evidence. And the world's most majestic hybrid was about to be put on the stand. The shift was subtle at first. Scholars, once content to copy the words of Pliny and Herodotus, began to look at the world around them with fresh eyes. This was the birth of natural history as we know it. Men like Conrad Gessner, a 16th-century Swiss physician, embarked on a monumental task, to catalog every known animal on Earth in his work, Historia Animalium. And in its pages, amongst the lions, eagles, and horses, there it was, the Griffin. But Gessner's inclusion was not a simple endorsement. He was a man caught between two worlds. He dutifully reported what the ancients had written, describing its form, its ferocity, and its nest of gold. Yet, a new current of skepticism ran through his prose. He questioned, he compared, he noted the lack of contemporary sightings. He was creating an encyclopedia not just of what was but of what was thought to be. By placing the griffin next to the rhinoceros, he gave it legitimacy, but by questioning its existence, he planted a seed of doubt that would grow into an unshakable tree of scientific inquiry. This intellectual curiosity was mirrored by a physical one. Ships with names like the Santa Maria and the Golden Hind were pushing the boundaries of the known world. Explorers returned not with stories of griffins, but with sketches of kangaroos, descriptions of armadillos, and specimens of birds of paradise. The creatures they found were stranger and more wonderful than many had imagined, yet they were all, in their own way, biologically plausible. They were mammals, reptiles, and birds that, while exotic, fit within the emerging understanding of the natural order. For the griffin, every new discovery was a blow. Every coastline mapped, every mountain range crossed, every desert surveyed, was another potential habitat that proved to be empty of the lion eagle. The here-be-dragon sections of the map were being replaced with shipping lanes and mountain passes. The griffin's territory wasn't just being explored, it was being erased. Then came the Enlightenment, and with it the codification of the scientific method. This was the final intellectual assault. In the 18th century, Carl Linnaeus developed his system of binomial nomenclature, a revolutionary way of classifying all life on Earth. Every living thing was given a place in a grand hierarchical system: kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. It was elegant, it was logical, and it was brutal in its efficiency. And for the griffin, it was a death sentence. Where, in this grand tree of life, could the griffin possibly fit? Was it Aves, the class of birds? Or was it Mammalia, the class of mammals? It couldn't be both. The fundamental biology was irreconcilable. Birds are oviparous, laying hard-shelled eggs. Lions are viviparous, giving live birth. Birds have hollow bones for flight. Lions have dense, powerful marrow-filled bones. Birds have a high-efficiency respiratory system with air sacs, entirely different from the diaphragmatic breathing of a mammal. A hybrid was not just unlikely, it was, according to the rigid new laws of biology, a categorical impossibility. It was a violation of the very order science sought to reveal. The griffin was scientifically homeless. It had no kingdom, no phylum, no place to call its own. It was officially relegated from the pages of natural history to the pages of mythology. The case was closed. For nearly 2 centuries, the griffin was dead to science, a fossil of the imagination, a beautiful but fanciful relic of a more credulous age. And then, in the 20th century, science did something remarkable. The very discipline that had killed the griffin brought it roaring back to life, though in a way no one could have ever expected. The key was not in a zoological textbook, but buried in the sands of time. The focus shifted from biology to a new, exciting field: paleontology. In the 1920s, American paleontologist Roy Chapman Andrews led a series of expeditions into the Gobi Desert, a vast, windswept expanse covering parts of Mongolia and China. This was the very heart of ancient Scythia, the homeland of the griffin myth. There, eroding out of the dramatic flame-colored cliffs, his team made a stunning discovery: the fossilized skeletons of a previously unknown dinosaur. It was a quadruped about the size of a lion, with a powerful parrot-like beak and a bony frill at the back of its skull that could easily be mistaken for the nubs of wings or prominent ears. They named it Protoceratops. But the most incredible discovery was yet to come. They found these skeletons in clusters, often positioned over nests filled with eggs. The image was undeniable: a fierce-beaked creature, standing guard over its precious clutch. For decades, this sealed the Protoceratops' reputation as a devoted parent. It wasn't until later that scientists realized the eggs actually belonged to another dinosaur, the Oviraptor, and the Protoceratops was likely a food source. But what matters is not what we know now, but what an ancient observer would have seen. And what would an ancient Scythian gold miner, prospecting in the Gobi, have seen? He would have seen the sun glinting off the very gold Herodotus spoke of, which is indeed abundant in the region. And as he dug, he would have unearthed the bleached white bones of a creature unlike any he had ever known. A beast with the four-legged body of a lion, but with the menacing sharp beak of a colossal eagle. He might have seen its bony frill and imagined it as the base of great wings. Most compellingly of all, he would have found these skeletons guarding nests of what looked like stone eggs, right there, in the middle of the gold fields. The connection is electric. The story writes itself. What other conclusion could he draw? This was the fearsome guardian of the gold, a creature of earth and sky, a lion bird, a griffin. The myth wasn't a flight of fancy, it was a feat of observation. It was pre-scientific paleontology. The Scythians were not inventing a monster. They were describing a fossil, interpreting real, physical evidence through the lens of their own understanding of the world. The Griffin wasn't a fantasy, it was a theory, a hypothesis based on evidence found in the field. This groundbreaking idea, championed by folklorist and historian Adrian Mayer, completely reframes our understanding of the Griffin. It suggests that the ancient world was not as disconnected from deep time as we once thought. People were finding fossils and trying to make sense of them, weaving them into their cosmology. The Griffin therefore becomes a bridge, a link between the age of myth and the age of science. It is a testament to human curiosity, to our innate drive to explain the unexplainable wonders we unearth from the ground beneath our feet. Science, in its quest for truth, had stripped the Griffin of its physical reality. It had dissected it, classified it, and ultimately dismissed it. But in a stunning reversal, a different branch of science had given it a new, and perhaps even more profound, existence. The Griffin was no longer just a symbol of divine power or a guardian of treasure. It was now a symbol of discovery itself. It represented a tangible link to a prehistoric past, a mystery that echoed through millennia. From a Scythian nomad staring at a strange skull in the desert, to a modern paleontologist carefully brushing the dust from that very same bone. The Griffin had been slain by the cold logic of biology, only to be resurrected by the romantic detective work of paleontology. Its body might be a fiction, but its bones, it turned out, were very, very real. And this transformation, from living beast to mythical monster to paleontological puzzle, was perhaps the most majestic chapter of its story yet. It had survived the end of belief and the dawn of proof, but now it faced a new realm, the boundless world of the modern imagination. And in that world, the Griffin didn't just find a home, it found an empire. No longer bound by the interpretations of ancient texts or the dusty reconstructions of paleontologists, the creature was set free. It soared into the pages of fantasy, where its true power could be unleashed. Authors, dreamers, and creators became the new Scythians, the new Greeks, the new Persians, each discovering the Griffin for themselves and giving it new life. In the 20th century, as fantasy literature carved out its own kingdom, the Griffin was royalty. While some, like Tolkien, preferred to keep its components separate, giving us the noble eagles and the fearsome wargs, others saw the power in their union. C.S. Lewis brought griffins into Narnia, creatures of righteous fury and noble bearing, fighting alongside Aslan. But it was in the burgeoning world of tabletop role-playing games that the Griffin was truly codified for a new era. In the rulebooks of Dungeons & Dragons, it was given stats, a temperament, a habitat. It became a creature you could encounter, fight, or even befriend. It was no longer just a symbol on a vase. It was a living, breathing part of a new mythology, a shared universe built on imagination. From there, it exploded into the mainstream. The digital age gave the Griffin flesh and sinew, pixels and polygons. In video games, we've ridden on their backs, soaring over fantastical landscapes in World of Warcraft. We've hunted them as formidable beasts in the gritty world of The Witcher, their screeches echoing through mountain passes. We've battled them as epic, divine monstrosities in God of War. Each incarnation explored a different facet of its ancient identity: the noble mount, the ferocious predator, the divine guardian. And of course, for an entire generation, the Griffin spirit was embodied in the form of a hippogriff named Buckbeak. In the world of Harry Potter, this close cousin, with the head of an eagle and the body of a horse, captured the Griffin's dual nature perfectly. It was proud, dangerous, and demanded respect, yet it was also fiercely loyal and capable of profound affection. It taught millions of young readers the ancient lesson the Greeks knew so well: to approach such a creature, a blend of wildness and majesty, you must do so with honor and courage. The Griffin and its kin had become a teacher once more. But its influence extends far beyond the realms of fantasy. Look around. The Griffin is hidden in plain sight, a silent testament to its enduring power. It's there in the crisp emblem of a university, symbolizing the union of intellectual wisdom and earthly strength. It's embossed on the logo of a bank or a security firm, a modern-day promise to guard your treasure with the vigilance of an eagle and the courage of a lion. It's the mascot for countless sports teams, a symbol of ferocious soaring victory. Military squadrons from the United States Air Force to international forces have proudly worn the Griffin on their patches, a sigil of air and land dominance, a perfect warrior. Why? Why has this creature, born from a fossilized misunderstanding and fueled by legend, maintained such a grip on our psyche? Because the Griffin is not just a monster. It is an archetype. It is a symbol of the ultimate synthesis. It represents one of the most fundamental human desires, to unite two opposing powerful forces into a single perfect whole. Think about its components. The lion, the undisputed king of the terrestrial world, a symbol of courage, strength, royalty, and raw earthly power. It is grounded, fierce, and commands its domain through sheer presence. Then the eagle, the undisputed king of the celestial world, a symbol of vision, freedom, divinity, and perspective. It soars above the fray, seeing the world with a clarity others can only dream of. Individually, they are apex predators, masters of their respective realms. But together they are something more. The Griffin is the marriage of might and mind, of earth and air, of ferocity and foresight. It embodies the ideal leader, the perfect warrior, the ultimate guardian. It is courage guided by wisdom. It is power tempered by perspective. It is the dream of being able to face any challenge on the ground, while simultaneously having the vision to see what lies beyond the horizon. It is a symbol of transcendence. This is why it resonates so deeply. We all feel that internal duality. We have our earthly, practical, day-to-day struggles, the lion's domain. And we have our aspirations, our dreams, our higher ideals, the eagle's sky. The Griffin tells us that these two parts of ourselves don't have to be in conflict. They can be fused into something stronger, something more complete. It is a symbol of our own potential, a reminder that we can be both grounded and visionary, both powerful and perceptive. The story of the Griffin is, in many ways, the story of human understanding itself. It began with a real, tangible object, the bones of a protoceratops in the Gobi Desert. Faced with this strange evidence, a beaked, four-legged creature found near gold, the human mind did what it does best. It didn't just classify, it created a narrative. It wove a story of a fierce guardian, a majestic beast worthy of the treasure it protected. For millennia, that story was truth. The Griffin was as real as the lion or the eagle. Then the age of science dawned and the narrative shifted. The myth was peeled back to reveal the fossil. The monster was replaced by a dinosaur. It seemed for a moment that the Griffin was dead, a casualty of empirical evidence, a charming relic of a superstitious past. But it wasn't, because the Griffin had already built a nest in a place that fossils and facts could never touch, the human imagination. Freed from the constraints of reality, it became more powerful than ever. It became a symbol not of a creature that was, but of an idea that is. An idea of perfection, of guardianship, of the majestic union of opposites. From a misinterpreted bone, to a divine messenger, to a heraldic symbol, to a fantasy icon, the Griffin has never truly been one thing. It is a mirror, reflecting the values and beliefs of the culture that looks upon it. The ancient Scythians saw a guardian of their earthly wealth. The Greeks saw a servant of divine justice. The medieval Christians saw a symbol of Christ's dual nature. And today we see a symbol of ultimate potential, a creature that embodies the best of two worlds. The Griffin doesn't fly in our skies. It doesn't walk our lands, but its reality is undeniable. It exists in our stories, our art, our emblems, and our aspirations. It proved that a legend, if it is powerful enough, can become its own form of truth. The beast that was born in the desert sands of antiquity now soars limitlessly through the landscape of our minds. The gold it was said to guard was never just a metal. It was the wealth of human creativity, the treasure of our ability to look at the bones of the past and imagine a creature worthy of the heavens. And the Griffin, the king of beasts and birds, remains the eternal guardian of the one treasure that will never fade, the boundless power of a world imagined.